Hello, welcome to FBNC World News. My name is THU THÏ NGUYên, your host, and here's the latest. On the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Ukraine takes Russia to International Court of Justice over signs of genocide. NATO is root cause of Ukraine crisis, says former UN Deputy Secretary General. Russia warns local media over Ukraine war coverage. Ukraine launches IT army, takes aim at Russian cyberspace. Army doctors donate blood, people donate supplies for Ukrainians. More stories in today's program. Chinese president stresses firm adherence to China's path of human rights development. Afghans condemn U.S. plan to fund 9/11 victims with their assets. Human factors aggravate impact of landslides in Brazil, says expert. How creole fishery threatens Antarctic wildlife. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday his nation has submitted an application against Russia to the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Russia must be held accountable for manipulating the notion of genocide to justify aggression. We request an urgent decision ordering Russia to cease military activity now and expect trials to start next week, Zelensky wrote on Twitter. On the same day, Zelensky, in a short video message, said that Russia's criminal actions against Ukraine bear the signs of genocide.
The night was hard. What are they doing? It's revenge. The people rose up to defend their country and they started showing their true face. This is terror. They are about to intensify bombing of Ukrainian cities. They intend to kill our children even more subtly. This is evil that came to our land and must be destroyed. They chose a tactic on purpose that is aimed against people's affection and anything else that makes life simply normal. Power plants, hospitals, kindergartens, housing, everything is under fire every day. We have to call things by their names. The criminal acts of Russia against Ukraine bear signs of genocide. I talked about this with the General Secretary of the UN. Russia is on a path towards evil. The world has to start depriving Russia of its right to vote in the UN Security Council.
Still on the topic, NATO is the root cause of the current Ukraine crisis, former United Nations Deputy Secretary General Pino Alachi said in an interview with CCTV on Saturday. The Russian Defense Ministry said on Sunday that Russian armed forces have destroyed 975 Ukrainian military infrastructure objects. Russian troops have entirely blocked the Ukrainian cities of Kherson and Berdyansk, and the armed forces of Donetsk and Luhansk have also made advances under the fire support of the Russian armed forces. The Ukrainian side claimed that battles in the past 24 hours mainly took place in Kharkov and Kiev's surrounding areas. The Ukrainian press said Russian forces have already entered Kharkov's downtown area, and a pipeline was blown up, to which the Russian side is yet to respond. The escalating clash between the two countries is the consequence of NATO's continuing its world expansion, according to Alachi, who is also a sociologist from Italy.
The root cause of the Ukraine crisis is the non-stop expansion of NATO, which led Russia to think it was being threatened and then reacted to it. I've said that this is a problem that has been going on for over 30 years. The Soviet Union was assured that NATO would not expand eastward, but the eastward expansion has continued. New NATO members already share borders with Russia, and Russia is saying it can't tolerate it anymore.
The United States, EU, and UK have announced latest sanctions against Russia on Saturday, including the removal of major Russian banks from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT, and restrictive measures against Russia's central bank. The former UN Deputy Secretary General thinks that the sanctions will likely have a greater negative influence on their enforcers. As Russia, being a large country with little external debt but very rich domestic resources and a major exporting country in the world, Olachi in particular noted that the key to resolving the Ukrainian crisis is held by European countries.
I think the solution is rather simple. The fundamental solution lies with European countries. European countries should declare NATO will not take Ukraine. So long as they make it clear and put it on paper, sign an international treaty, the situation can be solved.
Meanwhile, Russia's communications regulator accused 10 local media outlets on Saturday of falsely depicting what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine and distributing false information about events there. Among those sent warning letters were Iko Moskvy, a popular radio station, and Novaya Gazeta, a newspaper critical of the government whose editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize last year. Roskomnadzor, the regulator, ordered the media to delete the offending information or face restricted access to their websites and media resources. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine last week, saying it needed to demilitarize its neighbor. Also on Saturday, Ukraine's Vice Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov said Ukraine will create an IT army to fight against Russia's digital intrusions.
Ukraine has called its hacker underground to help protect critical infrastructure and conduct cyber spying missions against Russian troops, Reuters exclusively reported last week. "We are creating an IT army," Fedorov wrote in a tweet that linked to a channel on the Telegram messaging app which published a list of prominent Russian websites. "There will be tasks for everyone. We continue to fight on the cyber front. The first task is on the channel for cyber specialists." The Telegram channel listed the websites of 31 major Russian businesses and state organizations including energy giant Gazprom, Russia's second-largest oil producer Lukoil, 3 banks and a handful of government websites. Kremlin.ru, the official website of the Kremlin and the office of Russian President Vladimir Putin, was taken offline on Saturday in an apparent distributed denial of service, known as DDoS attack. Malicious data wiping software was discovered circulating in Ukraine last week, hitting hundreds of computers, according to researchers at the cybersecurity firm ESET. Suspicion fell on Russia, which has repeatedly been accused of hacks against Ukraine and other countries. The victims included government agencies and a financial institution. Britain and the United States said Russian military hackers were behind a spate of DDoS attacks last week that briefly knocked Ukrainian banking and government websites offline before the Russian invasion. Russia has denied the allegations.
Volunteers across Central Europe sprung into action on Sunday to help Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion, donating mountains of supplies, transporting new arrivals from the border, and providing what one official called a safe second home.
In Romania, soldiers queued to donate blood. With the bombing intensifying, hospitals are being prepared in Romania and the other countries surrounding Ukraine, from where people continue to flee on the 4th day of a Russian invasion that has pushed nearly 400,000 people to seek safety abroad. With men of conscription age prevented from leaving Ukraine, mostly women and children have arrived at the border in eastern Poland, Slovakia and Hungary and in northern and northeastern Romania in the hope of finding safety in what the Polish Interior Minister said would be a second home. Central Europeans sought to do just with volunteers flocking to social media to organize collections, transport, accommodation and any other potential help. Some collection centers had so many offers they had to turn away donations. At a Warsaw collection center, volunteers sifted through rolls of toilet paper, candles, bedsheets, canned goods and other supplies to prepare care packages, while the manager of a nearby hotel offered accommodation to a group of Ukrainians that included a 14-day-old baby. At borders, authorities set up makeshift reception centers in tents where people could get medical aid and process asylum papers, while thousands of volunteers drove up to the crossings with donations of collected food, blankets and clothes. In Romania, a Facebook page with 175,000 members generated 10,000 posts in the past 24 hours that allows Ukrainians to request help and volunteers can immediately respond.
In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Germany will sharply hike its spending on defense to more than 2% of its economic output. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz told an extraordinary session of the Bundestag lower house of parliament on Sunday. We will invest more than 2% of our GDP in defense every year from now on, he said, adding the government had decided to supply 100 billion euros for military investments from its 2022 budget. Germany has long resisted pressure from the United States and others to raise its defense spending to 2% of economic output in the light of its bloody 20th century history and resulting strong pacifism among its population. But it has made a turnabout on various long-standing policies in recent days, including its refusal to deliver weapons to conflict zones, agreeing to send Ukraine defensive anti-tank weapons, surface-to-air missiles, and ammunition. There could be no other answer to Putin's aggression, Scholz told lawmakers. Moving on to other news. The Afghans firmly denounced the United States for unfreezing Afghanistan's central bank assets to compensate victims in the 9/11 terrorist attack, claiming that the blocked Afghani assets belong to the Afghan people.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday signed an executive order on the blocked property of THU Afghanistan Bank, DAB, held in the U.S., planning to use half of the assets to compensate the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attack. According to the White House's statement, Biden requested that about $7 billion of the frozen assets to be divided equally, with a half funding 9/11 victims, and the other half transferring to a consolidated account held at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, for the benefit of the Afghan people, and keeping them out of the hands of the Taliban. The Afghan Taliban immediately condemned the executive order. Mohammad Naeem, spokesman for the Taliban political office in Doha, condemned the U.S. for stealing the property of the Afghan people. Naeem posted on social media that the theft of the frozen assets of the Afghan people shows that the United States has degraded to the lowest level in human nature and morality. Residents in Kabul voiced their firm objection against such rude behaviors of the United States. First, I don't think the U.S. has the right to use Afghanistan's money to compensate 9/11 victims. The U.S. had no reason when it attacked us, but a lot of people died in the past 20 years. So it's the U.S. that should compensate us, and they should not spend our money, Faiz Mohammed, a resident in Kabul said.
Speaking of China, Chinese President Xi Jinping, also General Secretary of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee, stressed firm adherence to China's path of human rights development while presiding over a group study session of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee on Friday.
Xi called for more efforts to pay attention to, respect and safeguard human rights and better advance the development of China's human rights cause as the country has embarked on a new journey to fully build a modern socialist China. To respect and protect human rights is a persistent pursuit of the CPC, Xi stressed. Since the 18th CPC National Congress in 2012, the CPC has continued to make the respect for and protection of human rights an important agenda of national governance, and has prompted historic achievements in China's human rights cause, Xi said. China has ensured long-term social stability. It is the only major country in the world that has consecutively formulated and enforced 4 national human rights action plans. It also actively participates in global governance on human rights, Xi added. In the practice of advancing the cause of human rights, China has blazed a path of human rights development that is consistent with the trend of the times and suits the nation's conditions, Xi stressed. Xi urged further efforts to fulfill the people's expectation for high quality and better lives, and meet their growing needs to exercise lawful rights in various aspects. Xi stressed actively promoting global governance on human rights, upholding the common values of humanity, and advancing the global governance on human rights in a fairer, more equitable, rational and inclusive direction. Human rights cannot be detached from the context of different social, political conditions or history, or cultural traditions in different countries, Xi said. Whether human rights are upheld in a country cannot be judged by the criteria from others, Xi said. adding that the practices of applying double standards or using human rights issues as political tools to interfere in others' internal affairs must be opposed.
Speaking of the landslides in Brazil, human factors including a lack of response capabilities by local authorities and fragile buildings have aggravated the impact of the serious landslides in Petropolis city of Rio de Janeiro in mid-February, according to a local expert. Heavy rainfall hit Petropolis, located in the mountains north of Rio de Janeiro, on February the 15th, triggering record floods and subsequent landslides. The disaster has led to the deaths of more than 200 people and missing of dozens of others so far. In an interview with CCTV on Thursday, Leonardo Freitas, an environmental disaster risk management researcher with the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, said that it was the human factors that intensified the terrible situation.
The rainfall, of course, is the most direct cause of the landslide. But the vulnerability of buildings, soil bareness as well the lack of responses by local authorities and residents when the disaster happened were also factors that exacerbated the situation.
Based on data from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the coverage of low-quality illegal buildings in Petropolis more than doubled from 1985 to 2020. The illegal buildings are mostly located in areas vulnerable to landslides and floods. Those who live in those places are mainly low-income people who choose such neighborhoods for a lower cost of living. How does krill fishery threaten Antarctic wildlife? And here's the answer. The icy waters of Antarctica are estimated to hold between 300 million and 550 million tons of krill, nearly as weighty as all of the world's cattle. This perceived abundance led fishing fleets to target Antarctic krill, but now scientists and conservationists fear it could imperil Antarctic wildlife.
The icy waters of Antarctica are estimated to hold up to 550 million tons of krill. These tiny shrimp-like creatures are the linchpin in the Antarctic food web, sustaining a huge number of species, from penguins to humpback whales. They are also increasingly the target for human consumption. A growing krill industry has been scooping up the crustaceans for use in fish oil supplements and fish feed. Scientists and conservationists fear that could further imperil Antarctic wildlife.
Antarctic krill are the keystone species in the Southern Ocean. Krill connect all the other species down there. It's impossible to overstate the importance of krill.
This perceived abundance has led global fishing fleets to target Antarctic krill. Vessels from China, Norway, South Korea, Ukraine and Chile trawl the region's choppy waters from December to July. Under established rules within the Antarctic Treaty System, trawlers must stay largely confined to 4 areas of the Antarctic Peninsula, and the seasonal catch is capped at 680,000 tons. But polar scientists say the current limits may not go far enough to safeguard the food supply for wildlife. Some also say there are indications that the fleet's activity is harming wildlife.
For the first time ever, it was reported that there were bycatch in the krill industry of whales, 3 juvenile humpback whales. And it's actually unknown how they came about to be caught by these continuous suction trawlers. They were definitely in poor body condition. They were starving. So they suspect perhaps that the humpbacks were actually following the krill trawlers to try to get krill and somehow got caught up in their systems and nets. But it seems really troubling that there were actually 3 of them that were caught this year when that's never happened before.
The fishing company, Norway's Marine, says it has since reinforced its ship's devices to keep marine mammals out of its nets. The krill industry is set to grow significantly in the next decade. Fish farming, which uses krill as feed, is the world's fastest growing food sector. And the krill oil market is projected to rise to more than $900 million by 2026. That's according to a report by global industry analysts.
We're really concerned because the krill fishery is overly concentrated in certain areas around the Antarctic Peninsula. And that means that they are taking a lot of fish from very small areas where all the predators are also congregated. So we have huge colonies of penguins, and the krill fishery is operating right off their shores of these colonies.
Mindful of the threat krill fishing poses to penguins, 8 companies have pledged to stay at least 19 miles away from key breeding colonies during incubation and chick rearing season. But even without competition from fisheries, the krill supply is under increasing pressure due to climate change.
We're already starting to see a debate amongst scientists, between climate change and industrial fishing, what's having a greater impact. But just like across our global oceans, it's the combination of different stresses that is so difficult for wildlife across the oceans, and why we need to see those ocean sanctuaries and creating those safe havens for wildlife.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.